TUK by George Adams. Continued. Chapter 13. The 1952 film Macau with Robert Mitchum is a nice low-budget thriller with a barrel-chested hero set against a crooked nightclub owner, and Jane Russell, a Hollywood dame who appears to sing for anyone if the price is right, but really she's got a heart of gold. In the end, she swims off with Mitchum to a yacht, and they leave the police to look after the villains. They were right. In the real world, as in the film, the police tend to look the other way too long and usually come in at the end to tag the bodies and do the paperwork. Mitchum and Russell just knew it ahead of most other people. At least that's how I felt as I sat on the jet foil speeding to the Macau Special Administrative Region, a small crowded promontory and two islands, which the Portuguese seized and sat on and squeezed for hundreds of years, until round about 1990 they suddenly realized it wouldn't always be that way, and they'd better start building a university and an airport and a few flashy buildings which weren't casinos. Nobody and everybody knows where all the gambling money went before then. It didn't go to the poor old ladies in Coloane village. By the time I'd got to Stanley, Larry was on the phone and informing me that the email from Adeline appeared to come from a server in Macau, which gave me a passable excuse to up sticks again and head across the water. He was hard at work getting the ISP, the actual user address of where it was sent from, and he said it looked like an internet cafe. Adeline had laid enough red herrings already for me to be dubious about that, but I thought it would do no harm to get out of Hong Kong for a while before Little John or someone else decided to call on me for another cosy chat. There was still no mention of murder by injection in Stanley or of suspicious death at TUK in either of the English rags, so my theory looked right. Hong Kong was as bad as they always believed. People could get knocked off and leave no trace if it was convenient for certain important parties. The war against triads, if it existed at all, was confined to renegades and small fry. There appeared to be a link between local politicians and the triads, and it could even be that one particular political party was only a front for the real power at work. So what? People get what they deserve. Maybe Hong Kong deserved tyranny and corruption. That was a bit hard to swallow for Nigel Trelford and for many others besides in clean, prosperous Hong Kong then, but as I look back on all the strange cases I knew or had heard about, it seemed to make perfect sense. Funny how things fall into place when you just stop believing the swanky offices, the shiny uniforms, the white shirts, the big cars, the vaguely cultured accents and the spotless facades. Perhaps it was time to go back to England and live in a place where the corruption was called sleaze and people didn't usually get bumped off. Yet. I wondered hard how such a state of affairs had come about, but I realized that it had not just come about. The problem was that I had not seen how things were before, and it was not hard to see that a large conspiracy wasn't needed. There wasn't really a conspiracy at all. There were simply a few people somewhere who decided not to make too much of a fuss and just follow orders, but there wasn't anything coercive or oppressive about it. We only really know what we read in the press and see on TV, and as far as the English press and TV is concerned in Hong Kong, that's all sewn up. The Chinese media are at the mercy of the police, really. The newsmen can suspect a lot, but they don't have access to confidential files and coroner's reports and crime scenes. The death of an old man in Stanley isn't really big news, especially when it looks like a heart attack, and if a couple of policemen find a nice young man's body under a bridge, they like to think suicide, because murder is just too much of a headache in the end, and isn't the easy way to interpret events. Police would rather say you lost something than it was stolen too. Why should they give themselves more work to do? Besides, Hong Kong has more suicides than road traffic victims, and murder, as in Japan, is rare. I suppose it only takes a word from someone high up in the chain of command to say such and such a thing is so, and Hong Kong police just go along with it. They're a very subservient force on the whole, and I never heard of a whistleblower in the force, unless, that is, he's charged with something, who likes to stick out in Hong Kong and go out on a limb. I never heard of it all that much, so I fought back the anger and the disgust and the depression and wondered what I personally could do about it, and whether I should do anything at all but grow up and go on living like everyone else. The jet foil drew into the thick, dull water of Macau harbour on the east side. It all looked a lot more glitzy than my first trip there 20 years ago, when the landings were all on bamboo stilts. My fellow passengers were the usual mix of short, seedy men who could have been extras in any triad movie, and fattish middle-aged women of an ugliness, or at best plain non-descriptiveness, which made them kind of interesting if you are intrigued by what occupies the minds of people obsessed with gambling and quick bits of money. There were also a few careful, bemused, quiet expats or tourists with slightly shocked and wary expressions on their face, hugging the Lonely Planet China bumper edition, or struggling with pushchairs and a gaggle of neat, sweet kids. The grime had already set in deep into the ferry building's red walls and sticky turquoise carpet. The long, squalid queues at immigration were a direct contrast to Hong Kong, and made you feel as if you were entering something more shady, wicked, third world, and chaotic. If you were a rookie out east, you would love it. If you were a jaded veteran like me, it just made your skin creep. The taxi touts and tour operators were plying their wares in the round-domed lobby of the ferry pier. Hong Kong men often came for a package weekend of girl, room and seat at the local casino, but it was hard to say which order that all came in. The tours could be booked at the Hong Kong end in TUK Centre. Just in case you couldn't wait, you could see a plastic folder full of the girls you were going to meet, in order to take away any sense of spontaneity and fun Macau could possibly have had for you. In fact, a trip to Macau never had any real fun in it. The nightlife was all paid for, just like the smiles of the girls in the casinos. But that was the big attraction for the hordes of visitors from Japan, the Chinese mainland, and Hong Kong. Predictable is safe. Paid is predictable. I found my way to the taxi queue and dropped myself into the back of one of the sinister black and white cabs, which was as greasy inside as a pimp's midnight patter. The streets of Macau were unrecognizable, like they always were, as new plazas and traffic solutions burst out all around you like April rain. We went past one clump of buildings twice and saw the Sands. It looked as if it had been designed by Liberace and executed by a gang of blind Irish pixies. Just over the road were the old gold towers of the Lisboa. They looked positively tasteful in comparison. After a few more pointless loops in the road, we were staring at the Bank of China building and beginning the slow ascent of the TAI Causeway. In the old days, the Hyatt Regency Hotel was the biggest thing on TAI, and the big draw for all the expats seeking a weekend of what they called the Mediterranean experience. Portugal, of which Macau is thought to be a direct imitation, is more Atlantic than anything else, but facts like that never got in the way of the advertising cliches. The Hyatt was dwarfed by the New Century, which had been renamed the Power of Greek, a caveman's idea of Grecian splendour, complete with Cecil B. DeMille plaster giants, Busby Berkeley pools, 20-yard-long murals and columns so thick you could practice bazooka shooting on them. The nightclub had survived, the New Century Boss, but most of the letters of the lights had gone out, and it now read Turibo. The Hyatt had gone down in the world and was called something else, but I still wanted to call it the Hyatt. The lobby filled me with poignancy. I saw my 3-year-old daughter running along the polished red brick floor with the same showpiece carpet, now grimy, worn and dull, and glimpsed the ghost of the beautiful smile of my former wife somewhere in the aura of it all. In those days, Macau was part of the Trelford slide to divorce by overdose of concupiscence, and I remembered so well slipping away in the evening to seek a girl who could be had for just a smile and the promise of dinner, never ever finding one. The desk clerks looked seedy now and wore the smart-turned, shabby uniforms which must have come with the building. The main doors swung open with a creak, and the lady in an immaculate white suit who used to clean up the lobby all the time was long gone. You should never go back. I knew that now. The rooms of the Hyatt had been built in a factory in Delaware and assembled one on top and one beside each other, 10 stories high. There was the entrance with the bathroom on the left, stained and mildewed now, and the minibar fridge and the little black statuette of something, and the mirror and the cupboard behind a kind of Mediterranean lattice. There was the longer chest of drawers with a glass top, scratched and ringed these days, with the failing TV set on top of it, another mirror, a set of brass arms on the wall with lamps at the end of them, and which could be dimmed and made to obscure the monochrome paintings of Chinese native scenes. There were the twin beds with the heavy turquoise bedspreads and the rattan bedboard. The windows had latticed shutters which stuck and caught your fingers, and the phone had buttons, 2 for room service and 6 for massage when the wife was out. Beautiful days of guilt, stolen pleasures, a bottle of Vino Verde in the ice bucket. There are few delights in new bachelorhood, and it quickly turns you to celibacy, even quicker than being married. Unlike marriage, it also gets you used to loneliness. The freedom of loneliness, overrated I think, as much as marriage is. I lay back on the bed and thought about Adeline, sentimental old clapped-out Trelford, dreaming once more of a girl who would solve everything. She clearly had something in her, if only the hint of villainy, if only a courage to flash a revolver around in the afternoon. That's why I was there. I saw it now. The unmarriable in full pursuit of the unmalleable. Last tango in Macau, or Mongkok, or wherever she happened to be. All the other issues were strong and appealing, but not as appealing as Adeline. The mystery of her, the darkness of it all, and the hope of incandescent glory with her lying beside me somewhere, or at least sitting with me, enjoying a glass and a joke, and telling me how she had arrived at a present state of being kidnapped, or playing along with a deeper scheme of things with cheap hoods in a black van at midnight. I set up the computer. There was only dial-up at the Hyatt, but I got through on something called iPass Connect. I punched up one of the pictures of her onto the screen and forwarded it to my Hotmail account. Then I set it as my desktop background on the computer screen. Soppy old sod Trelford. Larry said he was right. The location she had sent the email from was an internet cafe down near the Leal Senado. I wondered whether I should write back to her, but wondered what I could possibly say. Meet me for drinks at the Hyatt? Didn't seem a plausible invitation. she would suspect I was waiting with a gang of police or worse. No, I would have to be a bit more patient and circumspect than that. No doubt news of my presence in Macau would filter through to the parties involved, and I would be bumped off in the shower or bundled off home on a slow sampan, or the boys from Macau constabulary would appear with sharpened truncheons and a black Maria. In the meantime, there were all the many pleasures of Macau to take in: the caldo verde, the cod balls, the bacalao, and the African chicken, all washed down with cheap plonk, free of real taxes and any real distinction. In the old days, I often had a fantasy about coming to Macau for the summer with just my computer to write with, and possibly getting to know some girls online between grand opuses. But the girls in Macau weren't online. They were in the massage parlours, the nightclubs, and sometimes the lobbies of hotels. My Macau fantasy wasn't just about sex. It was the freedom of getting away from Hong Kong and being in a place which still had a vestige of something unknown, rough-edged, a little bit sleepy and relaxed. Macau was a restful place at that time and had a certain romantic mystique. Now it was all building site. Taipa had apartment blocks rising on it all over, and I knew Koloan would be next. The air was laced with concrete powder. I coughed a little as I walked over the road to the entrance of the Power of Greek. It didn't improve as you got closer to it. Groups of businessmen in suits were gawping at the splendor of it all and perambulating around the harsh stone park. They stood near the grand entrance waiting for a taxi, or they squatted at the edge of the road with cigarettes in their hands. The lobby lounge didn't go very far, as the wide staircase met you pretty soon with its thick stairs and wide railing and thick red carpet peppered with blackened spots of chewing gum and cigarette burns. Upstairs I could see the security men and the type of electronic screener walk-through they use at airports for deciding if you are a terrorist or not. Either side of them there were tall, bored girls in red and gold cheongsams and thick tan stockings who stared down at me with only the beginnings of a vague disdain, which probably didn't improve much, no matter how close you got to them. I decided to take a rain check on the casino and sat down in one of the few armchairs which didn't have a Guangdong businessman or a Hong Kong scumbag in it. The whole lobby was not for sober men, but I wasn't in the mood for drinking. I left the lobby and joined what looked like a queue for taxis. I waited, one stopped, and I got in. I said Leal Senado, but the driver had no idea what that was, so I said Lisboa, and reached for my pipe, filled it, and defiantly lit it. The Lisboa had the same taxi attendant, a male in Portuguese national dress, scampering around, and he even opened the taxi door for me, although I thought I looked very little like a high roller or an expat on a spree. I walked down the ramp leading to the hotel steps and turned right. The Leal Senado, the ancient building, which was the seat of Macau's legislature, was about 50 minutes walk away, and there was nothing much to see on the way except jewelers' emporiums full of Rolexes and improbable rings, flashing neon signs, pawn shops, nascent traffic jams, and hordes of the Macau gaming set, toothpicks, phones, glittering belts and all. I decided to try and stop looking at them, but so much gunge in one small place is kind of hypnotic. The street across the road from the Senado had been transformed into a pedestrian zone, and there was the usual collection of boutiques and restaurants and nice little cafe you could sit down in and pretend you were in Europe somewhere. The lane where the internet cafe lay was not hard to find at all, as there was a small flashing sign saying it provided access to your email account. It was just past a Sloppy Joe pasteleria, which proclaimed that it sold the best egg tarts in Macau, but then They all said that. The internet joint was smoky and had lots of males in their teens and 20s sitting in front of the monitors playing games which featured all sorts of battlefields and kung fu kickers and soccer robots. The noise was deafening. I speculated that if I sat at one of the tables in the main street, I might be able to see who came and went, but I couldn't be sure. The owner was an old wizened guy with a woolen hat on his head and a jade ring on his right little finger. He would have looked a lot better behind the grill of a pawn shop. I flashed the Chinese side of my work card and slipped 200 pataka notes to him and asked him to call me if he saw a beautiful tall girl wanting to use the machines. I punched up a picture on one of the screens and he printed it out for me, a copy for him and a copy for me. I said there was 1,000 in it for him if he called me immediately she came in. I gave him my number. He pocketed the money and looked as if he had been doing that kind of thing all his life. At last the deafening noise of mortal combat was behind me, and I sat myself down at the al fresco and ordered a coffee, which was remarkably good. I couldn't see the cafe from where I sat, but I could see most of the lane. I didn't fancy doing a 24-hour stakeout, so I thought hard and guessed Adeline would use the phone like everyone else these days to check her mail, and probably only came near a computer when she had to send an awkward attachment or download the same. As far as I knew, most good phones would display most attachments unless they were in some strange or cumbersome format. So I went back to the internet cafe and sent her a note saying she had to take a look at what I'd sent her. It was an encrypted zip file of some useless anti-spyware software. A commendable joke in the circumstances. I doubted if ordinary phones could handle it. I also gave her my phone number again because I guessed she wasn't the sort of girl to keep men's numbers for long. They would always want to call her back. If they didn't, she probably didn't care. There's a bitch born every minute in Hong Kong. Sometimes they are just as pretty as Adeline.